So Dr. Jan Bergerhoff, is our next speaker, and he's actually my boss, so I need to be on my toes, need to mind my P's and Q's, so to speak. And so he is one of the co-founders of Candidate Select, or CASE, and he's going to be talking about the longest assessment center there is and how to spot top potential earlier in the candidate selection process. So Jan, since you are the man in charge, so to speak, is this a sales presentation?
I hope not, Josh. I've tried to actually talk very generally about things that are interesting for recruiting and selection, a bit on IQ, a bit on personality, and then, of course, how this is related to the different studies that people perform. And, of course, I will be explaining a little bit how CASE actually works, because I think it is important to understand how we do the comparison between different study programs, and it's very much related to IQ and personality. But I've really tried to make it more general and also link it to a bit of academic research.
Right. Okay, well, if you're happy to proceed, then I will cede you the floor, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Josh. I will switch off the video so that we can all focus on the slides. Yes, thank you again. I'm very happy. It's a big privilege to talk to you this morning. I'm very happy to admit that this is one of the first UK audiences we are giving this presentation to. We started off as a German company, actually back in 2015, and we are metaphorically speaking looking at how high these hats are flying. We are trying to assess academic achievement or the value behind a certain degree. And the reason we are doing that is that back in the day in 2015, when we were PhD students, we thought it is a big pity when young people spend so much time and effort to obtain a higher education degree, and also higher education is supported by large amounts of public funds, and then young people spend so much time at these universities, and the universities assess them, but the assessment that the universities make and the final grades and degrees that young people obtain are very difficult to compare, and it's very difficult for employers to actually make sense of what is happening on a degree. And we thought that's a big pity. We thought that does not have to be that way, and because of that, we started Candidate Select. And at the beginning, this was only a speculation. So the fact that going to university might work as well as a predictor as an assessment center, that wasn't sure. That was just a speculation on our part, and we received some public money from the German government in this case that helped us to test this hypothesis, and we fortunately found that it was true and that you can predict the full range of things based on the academic degree. And so we are not 2 people anymore as in the beginning, but now we have a much bigger team. We're now more than 10 people, and of course this picture was taken before the current corona crisis, so most people like me at the moment are now in home office. But we are expanding. We are working on our mission to make degrees more comparable, not only in Germany, but also now in many other countries, including the UK. And the motivation for that and how it all works, I'm going to give you now. This is one of my last slides, which shows you German data. I've tried to find a similar study for the UK, but I didn't manage so far. It shows you the trend, how the number of study programs changed. And what you can see here, the number of study programs in Germany almost doubled from, 17,500 here to more than 30,000 back then, or up there. And the message from this slide is a very simple one. It is super complicated and very complex for any individual recruiter to properly assess the degree of an applicant. Quite simply because there are far too many degrees. These are the degrees in Germany, Germany. I'm sure in the UK you will end up with a similar number. But then imagine all the other countries with the growing internationalization of higher education. You get so many people, even also British nationals who took a degree abroad, or you get applications from the continent, or maybe even from Asian countries or the US. And it is very, very difficult to basically say, okay, this person who studied at the University of San Francisco, how do I compare it to somebody from the University of Brighton? What does it all mean? And I brought you one example, one local example of that complexity. On the left-hand side, you see a degree from the University of Chichester, Bachelor in Education, and you see the number of first-class honors, upper second honors, lower second and thirds. And on the right-hand side, you see a Bachelor at the University of Sussex in Psychology, and you see the same statistics. What springs into view immediately is that more than a third of people in this first bachelor program receive first-class honors, while hardly anybody in the second study program does. So if you then have an applicant with a first-class honors, and that applicant comes from the University of Sussex, it was probably the top student around, or one out of the top students. And if the person is from the University of Chichester here, it's still a good grade. It's still, it still carries some value, but it is not as strong of a signal. And such differences between study programs, they just exist. They exist in the UK, they exist in Germany, they exist everywhere. And so it is very important to actually know the context in which a grade was received. What we do is we provide that context. And in the past, there was the European Commission, but also various national governments who have seen that problem, the problem that there are too many study programs and it's too difficult to basically understand what the grading tradition, for example, in the individual study program is. And there were some European projects against that, but they were stopped in 2009. There was the attempt to introduce a European grading system together with the Bologna reforms, but that was stopped in 2009. The ECTS grades don't formally exist anymore, but the problem has not gone away. And so, for example, the Scientific Council of the German government in 2012, they published a large study, 150 pages, and they say, we recommend employers to take into account the university and subject-specific grading traditions. Only then do they obtain a valid impression of an applicant's potential. I think that's quite clear in some respect, but strangely, no government, at least no government I'm aware of, has so far provided a good way of doing that, has not only talked the talk, but walked the walk, as in the words of a previous comment. And in a way, that's what we try to do. But we don't stop at those grade distributions. The grade distributions are the first thing we look at. Let me make the pointer public so that you can see where I am with my mouse. So the first aspect is those grade distributions. So we are not happy when somebody says, okay, I have a 2.1. We want to know what percentage that is in the local grade distributions. And for that, we have data. For the UK, for example, we have all the grade distributions going back to 2012. So for the last 8 years, basically, we can tell you when you have an applicant, how strong that grade actually was locally in that study program. But if you think about it very carefully and very deeply, then you will realize that putting these grades, nominal grades, into the grade distribution only goes half of the way, or some part of the way, because it still doesn't tell you how competitive the study program was. And of course, it makes a big, big difference whether you obtained a certain grade or a certain position in the grade distribution in a study program that was super competitive, where people had perfect CVs in order to get in, where they got straight A's in A levels, or 42, 43, 45 points in the international baccalaureate, that sort of thing. And when you get a very good grade in such a program, it is a very, very strong signal. But of course, sometimes there are also programs where it's much easier to get in, where it's much less competitive. And if you get a good grade in such a program, it's still a decent enough signal, but it doesn't compare to the previous case. And so we thought that we needed to assess a program's competitiveness. And we do that in different countries. We use slightly different measures in all the countries, not because we believe in heterogeneity in different measures, but simply because there's a different availability what we have in different countries. For Germany, we actually have IQ and personality tests of a very, very large student survey. In the UK, we use labor market outcome data. So we look at wages people obtain after studying at a certain program. We look at unemployment. We look at admission criteria of a university, and we construct a measure based on that. And finally, once we have the competitiveness and the grade distributions, there's a lot of detailed questions which we need to answer. And that is typically done by the case algorithm. The case algorithm, for example, has to ask the question, if I was super strong in a program that we judge to be not so competitive, how does it compare to somebody who was maybe average or not so strong in a program that is judged to be very competitive? Can I overtake that other person? And how do you put that together? And we, in the research phase of the company in the very beginning, we came up with a nice algorithm. We are currently also testing or proving investigating the patenting potential of that algorithm. And in the end, we produce a K-score. And although what is happening until the K-score is typically quite complicated, the K-score itself is meant to be easy to use on a daily basis as a recruiter. It's meant to be simple enough so that it's worthwhile to deal with that measure practically on the ground when you receive a CV and when you want to make an assessment of the degree of the CV. How does that work? Imagine you have these very, very nice and sympathetic applicants, Bruno and Sophie. Bruno studied the bachelor at Chichester, which we just saw, and Sophie studied psychology at Sussex. And what case now gives to you is the case subject score and the case score. The case subject score will evaluate how well Bruno performed to all other people who studied the same subject as he did. And we see that Bruno, among everybody studying education, is at top 12%. That means 12% of the people were stronger than Bruno or have a more competitive degree than Bruno, and 88% have a less competitive degree than Bruno. And Sophie, among the psychology students, is at top 35%. That means 35% have a stronger degree, and then 65% have a less strong degree. The case subject score is very good. It's a very good measure if you have a job opening that really looks for a specialist. So, for example, in the case of Bruno, maybe you're looking for a teacher, or you're looking for somebody who really did study education, or another typical example would be architecture. If you're looking for an architect, probably you receive applications that are all related to architectural study programs, and then you can use the subject score to compare the degrees of all your architects to each other. Now, it isn't very useful in situations where you're looking for a more general profile, general management positions, or simply any job where different study backgrounds might be suitable. For that, there is the K-score, and the K-score is actually the measure that is mostly used by our customers. The K-score now compares Bruno with his degree to all people in the same cohort. So see people at different universities studying different programs, and then we see that Bruno received a top 34% K-score. That means that 34% of people were better, and conversely, 66 have a less strong degree. While Sophie, on the other hand, who was behind Bruno in her subject score, receives a boost in the K-score and is now at top 23%. That means that Sophie, for a general purpose job, might be the slightly more competitive candidate than Bruno, at least based on her higher education degree. Now, why might that be the case? How is a higher education degree linked to anything you're interested in or to something you want to know when you make a recruiting decision? For that, let me briefly look into some academic literature. I've brought to you this morning one of my favorite figures. It is a figure from a very, very strong review paper from Almlund et al., 2011, Personality, Psychology and Economics. And in this et al., there are hidden a large number of researchers, among them James Heckman. One or two people may know James Heckman is a Nobel laureate economist, very strong, very, very famous, incredibly intelligent, and he is one of the co-authors of this study. And this study is a review study that looks at personality measures and, among others, links it to job performance. Now, we all know that job performance is a difficult beast, it's a difficult creature, because jobs are also different, and measuring job performance can be tricky. And so what they did is they looked at a large range of studies, and in all these studies, job performance tends to mean something very, very different. And it is the job of these researchers to basically say, okay, how can we make this comparable? How can we make the different tasks and the different job performance comparable, put it on one scale, and have a big summary of how different personality measures and also intelligence are now correlated with job performance. And that's exactly what they did. And the result you see here in front of you in that by now famous figure 16 of that paper. And Kim, in her very nice presentation this morning, has already introduced the Big Five to you. So the Big Five personality traits is the current workhorse in science when it comes to measuring personality. I just go through them very quickly. It's emotional stability, agreeableness, extraversion, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. And here at the bottom, you see intelligence. And you see on the horizontal axis the correlation with that measure of job performance that the authors constructed. And what you can see right away is that intelligence correlates most strongly with job performance. And that is consistent with so many research papers, some of them also very famous, some of them you may know, for example, the famous Schmidt-Hunter papers on job performance. Their main conclusion is also that there's nothing better than intelligence to predict job performance. But I brought you this figure not to show you how important intelligence is, but to show you how important the personality traits are collectively. So while none of the personality traits itself is as strong a predictor of job performance as intelligence, together they add up to quite a sizable prediction of job performance. And no personality trait in this regard is more important than the personality trait of conscientiousness. Sometimes conscientiousness is also called will to achieve. It refers to the tendency or to the desire of a person to do things as good as possible. Also refers to preferences about punctuality and sometimes about structure and also even a little bit about hierarchy. But I think the important aspects of conscientiousness for job performance is this grit aspect, this the self-motivation to talk about to do a job well. And what I'm going to have for you on a later slide is I'm going to link all these factors to the K-score. So the K-score being the score that assesses the higher education degree, and I'm going to show you how the different factors are correlated to that. But before I do that, I would like to take on the hat of somebody who might be a bit skeptical about why to look at the higher education degree in recruiting at all. And the first thing I'm going to ask is, are we getting just Fachidioten? Now, I wanted to translate the word Fachidioten into English, and then I realized that this is becoming, maybe slowly becoming, one of the words, the German words, that is entering the English language by itself. It refers to a person who is very, very clever in a particular field of study, or very clever, very intelligent in some particular aspect, in some regard, but is generally not so productive because he or she is lacking skills that are necessary to, for example, do well in a company environment. And one of the criticisms or skeptical comments I frequently hear when I also talk to German clients over here is, somebody might be very strong at university, but then it might turn out he is one of these Fachidioten. Yeah, it might turn out that he's not useful in the job environment in the end, because he might be very good at, say, accounting, but then cannot do teamwork, etc. Something like that. And so I wanted to address that point directly and also link it to these personality measures which we've seen on the previous slides. So when we look at higher education degrees, are we priming ourselves to recruit Fachidioten? And the answer to that is a straight, flat no. And the no, or the justification for this no, partly comes on the later slide when I show you how K-score is linked to these personality measures that are then also linked to job performance and do very well. But even more importantly, this no is linked to the fact that the whole concept of Fachidioten is very, very much flawed when you look at recruiting in general, because there is no correlation between intelligence or cognitive ability and certain personality traits in the population. When I say there is no correlation, then I'm not giving you the full truth. There is tiny little bits of correlation, but they are typically all in favor of intelligence. So IQ is very slightly correlated to almost everything that we consider positive and desirable. Among the big five personality traits, IQ is mostly correlated to openness of experience, but it's also slightly positively correlated to, for example, conscientiousness, which we've seen is very important. IQ in the population is correlated to higher earning potential, is correlated to longer life expectancy. So IQ tends to be a jack of all trades in the sense that it improves almost everything, with a few, two exceptions I'm aware of. The one exception is that high intelligence people tend to be prone to fall for visual illusions. So this is an example of a visual illusion. The illusion being that the top bar looks larger, the top horizontal bar looks larger than the bottom horizontal bar, although they're exactly of the same size. So more intelligent people have the tendency to fall for these illusions more readily. And the other fun fact is that intelligence, at least in women, tends to be positive correlated with alcohol consumption. So that is the other thing that maybe is not considered to be desirable, where intelligence actually positively correlates. But there's no general evidence that more intelligent people then bring less to the table in terms of personality when it comes to recruiting, and that focusing on intelligent people might hamper your recruiting skills or your recruiting performance in any way. Having said that, the question remains, why do so many people have the impression that IQ and the right personality often do not go together? And for that, I have nothing to offer you but speculation. But I think we have a good, or maybe at least a nice theory why that may be the case. So imagine you are in a general situation. The general situation is that IQ and personality are not correlated. But then, as a strong recruiter, working for a respectable company, you gradually build up a good employer brand. And the employer brand is targeted or is meant to attract the very best workers or the very best applicants for your company. And suppose you succeed. suppose it does that. You get only the most able people to apply to your job. What does that mean? Well, if you get only the most able people to apply to your job, then you get people who have a very good combination of intelligence here and personality. So they're in the top right of this graph. And some of them, they are very able because they are so smart, like this person over here, but they are lacking the positive personality traits. And other people might be very able, not because they are so incredibly bright, but because they really bring certain personality traits to the table that make them attractive as employees. And if this is the picture you are seeing, what you have is suddenly a correlation between intelligence and personality for a very simple reason. If you only attract the most able people, then it's possible to sort of substitute. For example, I'm slightly less intelligent, but my personality and my behavior is even more conducive to business, and so I still fall into this very productive category. And also the other way around, I might be less blessed with these good personality traits, but then I'm blessed with large cognitive ability, and I can compensate for that. That doesn't mean that there are not enough people who bring both to the table, but just the mere fact that you are focusing on the best produces a correlation which is actually not there in the entire population. Another hypothesis that might be a reason for that is that people just expect more from somebody who they perceive to be intelligent. So if you think that somebody is really bright, and then you are doubly disappointed if the person behaves in a way that you consider to be bad, because you maybe think the person should have thought better. So much for the concept of Fachidioten and why that should not be the biggest worry you have. I'm gonna skip one slide, and I'm actually gonna go to this slide first, because this is and please don't be shocked by these numbers with all the stars. This is an excerpt from the PhD thesis of my co-founder Philip and me. There were certainly no Nobel laureates involved in producing that thesis. I can guarantee that to you. What it shows is the selection into different study programs you see on the left-hand side: pedagogy, social science, engineering, etc., based on personality traits. And here we have the big 5 personality traits, which we remember from before: agreeableness, conscientiousness, and so on. And we also have some economic personality traits. Economic personality traits typically is something like risk aversion, impatience, altruism, but I'm not going to go in, I'm not going to focus on them in detail. What you can see in this graph is you see a lot of stars, and wherever you see stars, you see a significant selection into the study program. So for people who study business or economics, for example, there is a significant selection in the sense that people who do that, who select into this study program, are less agreeable, are more conscientious, are more extroverts, no significant difference in terms of emotional stability, and are less open to experience. And this shows you that the study program is very much connected to personality as well as intelligence. And this is exactly what we find when we do large studies where we have people performing IQ tests and personality tests, and we link it to their K-score. So this is based on this Fachkraft 2030 study, which I haven't really mentioned so far. It's a big study we do here in Germany with more than 300,000 people participating to date. And these people do an IQ test and they do a personality test, and we can link it to the K-score. And what you see on the left-hand side is that an increase in one standard deviation of agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness results in, on average, a almost 7-point higher K-score. While on the right-hand side, you see a very similar figure when it comes to cognitive ability. I'm not going to discuss the difference between these two measures. If you're interested, we can maybe do that later on. But what you can see here is that people who are on average 1 standard deviation more intelligent, they will also have a better K K-score, in this case, a better K-score that is stronger by 8%. And so we remember that cognitive ability and personality is related to job performance. We took that from this graph. And so what we would expect now is that somebody who has a better K-score has better IQ and has better personality, and then also has a better chance of performing strongly on the job. And that's exactly what we see. So we did a big case study with a company called Mahle. It's a company from the German South, from Stuttgart. It's a large company, 15 billion euros in revenue. They are manufacturing. They produce parts that then go into cars, and they have a trainee program. And inside of this trainee program, we evaluated the job performance of trainees looking back 2.5 years. So these trainees were hired 2.5 years ago, and we were checking whether Mahle was satisfied with these trainees after 2.5 years, and whether we could have predicted it using the K-score. And we started off looking at the GPA. So this is just a raw grade that somebody had in their application, and it's called 1, 2, 3 because it's a German grade. So the 1 is the best, it's very good, 2 is good, and 3 is satisfactory. And what you can see here is there's no correlation. So the probability that Mahle was very satisfied with a trainee did not depend on the German grade whatsoever. It's quite a shocking result for the education system in a way. Then you can place it into the grade distribution, and so you go away from these 1, 2, 3, and you say, okay, somebody is maybe at top 90% of the grade distribution. That means locally that person wasn't so strong, and then you see, okay, there's a slightly lower probability of being very satisfied, but it's still tiny. It's not very much. But if you do the full treatment, if you look at the K-score, then you see that somebody who has a K-score at the very end of the distribution, so where almost everybody else has a stronger degree, then the probability that Mahle is still satisfied with that person lies at around 10%. While if you move up into the other direction, where you go for the very strong K-scores, then the probability that Mahle is satisfied with that person is actually 3 in 4. And think about what a difference that makes. Whether you hire somebody and you have a 1 in 10% chance of being happy with that person after 2 years, or you have a 3 in 4% chance. 3 in 4 chance of being happy with that person after 2 years. That makes the world of a difference, especially considering how a mishire, how annoying that is and how expensive that is. Thinking about the fact that you have to recruit again, all the training that you've invested, the negative impact on staff morale, on your team, all the annoying issues you have to deal with in the meantime. And I'm not telling too much when I'm saying that such an assessment, depending on the size of the order, is cost somewhere between a single-digit euro or pound amount and a small double-digit one. And so that makes a very, very simple business case, comparing these 1 or 2-digit figures to maybe £20,000 cost of a mishire. And this is very easy to justify and very easy to measure, especially when there's some kind of performance KPIs available. If you look at something like retention, or you actually look at feedback, etc., and you can link it to that, then it is very, very easy to make that argument and to show this is a strong business case. If such measures are not available, then you still benefit from the fact that you have this information, which is a very good predictor of job performance. You have it early on in the application process. So you can, if you have, for example, more expensive measures, with like an on-premise assessment center, you benefit from the fact that you can target that better towards people who then also have a higher chance of performing strongly after being hired. Now, I fully realize this is only one study, and if I was shown that study, I would greet it with a lot of skepticism. What I can do is I can tell you that we have 13 customer studies, and 5 companies were so kind to allow us to publish the results. And I have a document, also an English-speaking document, that summarizes those results, and I'm very, very happy to share it afterwards together with the slides. For now, I cannot show you all these 13, but I will show you another one. I will show you a case study with a company called Simon Kucher, or I think in the Anglosphere, English-speaking world, they're commonly known as Simon Kutscher, and it's one of the largest only German consultancies. They are looking at pricing, and they're consulting on pricing. They also exist in the UK and also in Boston in the US, and they typically try to hire quite competitive, or strong, intellectually clever graduates. And what we did with them is, because this is a consultancy and they have a concept of a timely promotion. So they have a target for every consultant when this consultant should be promoted. And we looked at whether the timely promotions of consultants were related to how they did at university before. In a very, very similar manner as you saw on the previous slide with the Mali company, we looked at the GPA, so very good, and so on, and we saw whether this can predict whether a consultant receives the timely promotion. And lo and behold, we see the same thing as we did before. So there is no immediate connection or correlation between that GPA and the measure of the probability of being promoted on time. When we look at the local percentile, use the grade distribution again to contextualize those grades, we again see very little. It now slopes into the correct direction, so at least somebody who's behind has a slightly lower chance of being promoted, but if you look at it, it is really tiny, and that would not be worthwhile including in a recruiting process. But if we look at the K-score, and the K-score here doesn't extend to 100 because there was nobody at Simon Kutscher. This is based on 96 employees over a period of 5 years. So we had about, we didn't have everybody all of the time, but we had about 500 data points. This is what this is based on. And on these 96 employees, nobody had a K-score from below 75. So this is why this part of the curve is empty. And what you can see here is that somebody who had a 75 K-score has about a 50% chance of being promoted on time with Simon Kutscher, while somebody who had a very, very strong K-score has a 90% chance of being promoted on time. And the timely promotion, of course, over the spread of more than 90 consultants, then is a relatively decent measure of how the people did. Because, of course, individually, not being promoted on time can have all sorts of reasons. Personal reasons, maybe health reasons, maybe somebody was just unlucky with a certain project, but spread over 96 consultants, such factors should even out. And then the fact that you see a very, very strong relationship here shows you that there is a very decent connection. Now I'm almost finished with what I want to show you today, but there's one very important question that remains, namely, how is it possible to assess such degrees? And the assessment can be done on www.case-score.co.uk. This is the kind of assessment which you would do if you just want to assess a degree every once in a while. For example, you might decide that you want to assess foreign degrees only, or you might might have a policy for that, or the incoming applications, the number of applications just not so big, so you just want something that is very quick to use whenever you want it, and that can be done on that web platform. Setting up an account costs you 5 minutes, and then you can buy credits to assess such a degree, and you use up the credits whenever you make the assessment, and if you don't make the assessment, you're not using up the credits, and so you can use it whenever you need it. For customers that receive a lot of applications, I firmly believe that integrating case into the applicant tracking system provides by way by a lot the best benefit, because imagine you're in a situation where you receive something like 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 applications a year, and every time you receive an application, you receive the K-score with it. And you can show that the K-score, for example, is very much linked to the success in the assessment center or the access to the partner interview, etc. in the very end. But you have that information from the beginning now, so you can decide whether you want to put that person through a test, who you can prioritize the CV screening based on that score. I'm not arguing that the score should be the only thing that you look at, but you have a very nice validated quantitative measure from the very start, which means that you can focus on people who have a high chance of being successful in your recruiting process and get back to them more quickly, and guide them through the application process with all your care and all the attention you can give them. And then when you have somebody who is maybe not such a good K-score, and you then get to them in the CV screening and you realize, oh God, there are some factors in there that are still very relevant, or I maybe fully understand why under these circumstances a better degree was not possible, then you can take that into account, and you can get to that person and invite them and find out all that you like about them. And I think one final point I would like to make before I very, very much welcome your questions is that you've probably noticed that we are very, very interested in predictive capacity. What we want to provide you is we want to provide you a scoring that reduces your risk when making a hire, because risk is very omnipresent. Even in an interview, you only learn so much about a person, so you don't really know whether hiring this person is a good decision. And many times you only find out later on, by which time it might be too late, or it might be very costly to change the decision. So we are very interested in making the best prediction possible. Making the best prediction possible has a very nice side effect. It also means it is fairer. It is less prejudicial, because making the best prediction possible doesn't care about, for example, reputation. We try, when we rank universities for competitiveness, what we are really interested in is the competitiveness of students. And we are not caring about the fact what the research output of the university was, or whether the library is very well equipped, and those traditional measures. We don't care about the traditional reputation, but we only care about how competitive was it on the ground. And I know this has always been a very big debate in the UK, with the prevalence of Oxbridge, and Dan this morning mentioned the Russell Group. Of course, some of these programs also do very, very well in the K-score, but they don't do well in the K-score because they have a reputation itself. They do well in the K-score because we see it in objective measures. And one side effect which we very much see in Germany is that when employers start to use Ks instead of looking at the degrees on face value, they start to appreciate sometimes small unknown programs that are still very competitive, because they might be in a certain area that works very well, or they are very appealing to a certain group of young people, so they receive a lot of applications. And but then, because they have no historically grown reputation, the graduates from those programs tend not to be rewarded. And with a measure like Ks, where we only care about the competitiveness of the students itself and not about the reputation, this can be mitigated. I think I've gone slightly over time. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. So now we're going to be taking questions from the chat. Number one is from Lee Rush. I have children to look after, or I am disabled and have to go to Chichester rather than Sussex University. Am I going to be disadvantaged by kids?
So what we are trying to do is we try to measure the signal of the person, of the degree, as objectively as possible. If you happen to study in a program that is less competitive, yes, on the one hand, you are at a disadvantage in the sense that you cannot reach certain ranks of the K-score. By definition, because you cannot, the signal is derived that you perform better than other people, and when the other people are not so competitive, then it's not possible to get into the top ranks. You can only become, I don't know, so a metaphor, you can only become world champion if you actually participate in the championships. Having said that, if you are at a less competitive university, then we would also expect you to do better inside the great distribution. And so there's a countering factor here. So then you might not be able to rise into the top ranks, and that might also, to be frank, from a societal perspective, it might also not be fair that you are prevented from rising to the top ranks, because you might very well have it in you. It's just that we cannot, that is very difficult to measure it because you've never been exposed to that sort of competition. Having said that, you might not rise to the top ranks, but you will still obtain a fairly decent rank because you will then top at your local institution.
Okay. Next question is from Mo. He makes first a general comment that in the UK, we see less relevance for degree and uni grades as people advance more in their career. So if I'm hiring someone who has 15 years experience in one field, then regardless of the grades they had in uni, they're more interested in their competence and behaviors than in their previous job to predict how they perform. We have many successful CEOs who have never been to uni. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, and I perfectly agree. So we typically recommend to use the K-score for young professionals, and the young professionals category falls in, captures the up to 35s generally. I would still like to add a further remark or comment to that very, very excellent question. And that remark is that university has one big advantage over previous job experience. Job experience can be more relevant, of course, because you're in a company and you use the skills that are relevant inside the company, and that's also what you want to do, or what you need to do in your next job, even though jobs can be very different, of course, as well. But the big difference between jobs and university, a job experience and university experience, is that university experience is properly measured. You measure it in a semi-anonymous way through exams, through assessments from a neutral body, while job experience and your assessment inside a job is a function of a very social process. So it depends on whether you are on good terms with your boss. It depends on whether your co-workers end up liking you. And sometimes I think it's not even unheard of that somebody received excellent recommendations just to move on, to go into a different department or leave the company. And so it's much more difficult to use the previous job experience to actually assess how strong that performance was. And this is why I think that even for slightly older applicants, so going up to the 35s, looking back at the university experience is still very relevant, because here you have a decent measure at hand that you can use and that you can quantify.
Okay, for the next question, just to clarify just sort of how a case can be applied across countries, can you just give a short overview of which countries this will be available in?
Yes, when we started the company, we were all told that we need a mission statement, and we picked the mission statement of making education comparable worldwide. Now, I think I will be very old and even more gray than at the moment by the time we achieve that. So, of course, it is not possible, and I also cannot promise that we can compare every kind of degree from every country there is. Yet, we are expanding our database, and we are currently covering Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, Portugal, and Spain. And by the end of this year, we will be covering the US, and we will be covering also, I think, very importantly, India. And that means that if you have degrees from these countries, you can get a very good prediction out of those degrees, and you can use it in your application process. And for these countries, we have great distributions. Well, for India, we do not actually have great distributions, but we have something else that is very nice. But I think that would take too much time to explain here. So we have very good context information for these Indian degrees, or for the degrees from these countries, and you can use it in the application process. And if somebody does not come from a country that has a K-score, then it's also possible to think about how to complement this. So I think for that we would be looking at the recruiting process individually and make a recommendation on what to do once we understand what the needs of the company are and where most of the applications are coming from. Josh, I'm not hearing you at the moment. Maybe your mic is on mute. Yes, now.
Yes, good call. Thank you. Okay, take two. So 2 more questions in the chat. Lee asks, I have a choice of doing an apprenticeship engineering degree or a straight engineering degree. Which should I do, and what factors would you use to advise me?
Yes. So not knowing this particular context, of course, I don't know where you live, for example. I think doing an engineering degree in the UK is generally a good idea. For the apprenticeship engineering degree, I would have to know a little bit more about that program and what it looks like. Generally speaking, engineering graduates are in demand in the United Kingdom. That's also something that Dan said this morning. And doing an apprenticeship with it, where you receive practical experience, probably sounds like a good call to me as well. But I don't want to overextend with my advice because I don't have enough detailed information. And maybe even Dan, who knows the sourcing labor market in the UK much better than I do, can offer some advice on that in the end.
Okay, and a question from Mo. Does that case, I imagine, include degrees obtained via online distance learning?
If it is a degree that is an actual degree in the sense you have an accredited bachelor or an accredited master's degree, then yes. If it is some kind of diploma, for example, I don't know, Udemy diploma saying you've done machine learning course XYZ and you've finished it, then no, because there's no data on that.
Okay, I see. Okay, I will give time for one more question. If Lee, because I see he's typing now, so I want to make sure he gets that in before we move on. Yeah, so I'll give him a moment there. Okay, Lee asks as our final question, I need to think more about your presentation, which I found really interesting. How can I find more information?
I mean, the standard would now to refer you to our website, but I don't want to do that. So what we can do, I will definitely I will share the slides with everybody who participated. I will also attach a further document that shows how the degrees are linked to job performance and success in the recruiting process. I can send that to you, and I'm also very happy to engage in a follow-up and talk more about, especially once maybe if you've reflected a bit on and developed some more of your own thoughts, then I'm very happy to answer them or to engage in a debate with you personally.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much for that fantastic presentation, Jan.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Josh.